Macy never raised her hand in class, never played at recess. She had a small notebook she never let go of, filled with drawings of cats that looked more like tigers, and tigers that looked softer. For months, she remained quiet until one school assembly changed everything. She walked to the podium, looked at the crowd, and whispered, "The dog who saved them wasn't even their kind." Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. It had rained all night in Pine Grove, Oregon, the kind of spring storm that came down in curtains, washing the evergreens clean and leaving the roads coated in glistening mud. By morning, the sky was a muted gray, still low with clouds, and the scent of wet pine clung to everything. The small town had just begun to stir trucks rolling down gravel driveways, porch lights dimming one by one, when Caleb Monroe stood at his kitchen window, a chipped mug of black coffee warming his calloused hands. Caleb was a tall man in his early 40s, lean and wiry, like someone used to hauling more weight than most would dare. He wore his brown beard trimmed short, though the silver creeping into it hinted at the years spent between forest lines and emergency calls. Once a military medic, he had returned to Pine Grove to run the town's underfunded but fiercely committed wildlife rehabilitation center. The war had left him with a quiet intensity. He didn't speak unless there was something worth saying, but when he did, people listened. At his feet, a 7-year-old golden retriever named Sunny lay curled in her usual spot on the braided rug. Her fur, a deep honey gold, shimmered in the half-light of dawn. She wasn't large for her breed, more compact her frame, solid but feminine. Her ears lifted as Caleb stirred, sensing something in the air. Sunny had once been a therapy dog trained to bring calm to veterans in recovery. Caleb had adopted her from a flood rescue 6 years earlier, finding in her a gentleness that words failed to name. She had never had pups of her own, but she mothered everything: wounded deer, abandoned raccoons, even a cranky owl that once refused to eat unless Sunny was nearby. The phone rang. Caleb answered with the instinct of someone who rarely got casual calls. "Monroe." "Caleb, it's Ranger Knox. We've got a situation: 3 tiger cubs Bengal by the markings. Abandoned. Found them near the ridge by Lake Ashlow. Alive barely. No sign of the mother. They're too young to regulate body heat. We need your help. Can you bring Sunny?" Caleb glanced down. Sunny was already standing, eyes locked with his. She knew. "We'll be there in 20, Caleb said, and the line went dead. By the time the truck pulled out of the driveway, Pine Grove was fully awake. In the back seat, a small figure buckled herself in without a word: Macy Monroe. Caleb's 10-year-old daughter, adopted after his sister died in a car accident the year before. Macy was a delicate girl, all elbows and quiet. Her long brown hair was always tied in a lopsided braid she did herself, and she wore a red hoodie with thumb holes stretched out from nervous fingers. Since her mother's death, she had withdrawn from the world's school friends, even her father. But she'd asked to come today. Caleb had hesitated, then nodded. Maybe being near the animals again would help. She hadn't been to the forest since before the funeral. The drive to Lake Ashlow was slow going. Mud from the storm had turned the forest roads into a series of tire-swallowing trenches, and mist clung to the windshield in fat beads. Macy didn't speak, just stared out the window, clutching the stuffed bear she never went anywhere without. Sunny sat in the front seat beside Caleb, unusually still, her nose pressed lightly to the cracked side window. They arrived to find 2 park rangers crouched near a large insulated carrier. One of them, a broad-shouldered woman in a soaked ranger jacket, looked up as they approached. "Dr. Monroe," she said. "I'm Sarah Knox." Sarah was in her mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with close-cropped blonde hair and sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. She had the calm demeanor of someone who'd weathered many disasters and learned to keep her voice level no matter what. Rumor around Pine Grove said she'd once lost her entire fire crew in a wildfire up north, and that since then she didn't flinch even when staring down a charging elk. "They're in bad shape," she said, stepping aside to reveal the cubs. "We kept them together for warmth, but the smallest one's not moving much." Inside the carrier were 3 Bengal tiger cubs barely days old. Their eyes were still shut, their striped fur damp from the rain and matted in places with mud. One of them, the smallest, had a puncture wound near its shoulder, likely from a desperate attempt by the mother to thin the litter. Rejection was common in stressed first-time mothers. Caleb knelt down. "Jesus, they need a mother." Sarah said, her voice flat. "We've got heating pads and formula back at your center, but they won't make it unless something calms them, keeps them regulated," Sonny Caleb said simply. Macy had stepped back, her arms tight around the stuffed bear, but she was watching Sonny intently now. The golden retriever stepped forward slowly and carefully, her head low. She sniffed at the carrier, then looked at Caleb as if to ask for permission. He gave a nod. Sonny nosed the flap open and looked inside. There was no hesitation, only that quiet, deliberate softness unique to animals who understood fragile things. She moved her muzzle close to the smallest cub and gently licked its forehead. The cub twitched a tremble of response. "Unbelievable," Sarah whispered. One by one, Sonny touched noses with each cub, licking their sides, rearranging their tiny bodies so they lay more snugly together. Macy crouched down slowly without anyone asking her to. Her voice came out low, unsure. "She's helping them." "She always does," Caleb said. The rain began to fall again, lighter this time. The trees around them stood like tall sentinels, their bark darkened by water, their branches heavy with green. In that gray, rain-misted clearing, something unspoken passed between the girl, the dog, and the 3 tiny lives in the box. Macy's eyes didn't leave Sonny. The quarantine nursery at Pine Grove Wildlife Haven wasn't much more than a retrofitted shed tucked behind the main rehabilitation center. But Caleb had transformed it overnight into something closer to a sanctuary. Inside, the air was warm and faintly sweet, with formula milk heating pads hummed quietly beneath thick wool blankets, and a gentle playlist of cello music drifted from a speaker Caleb had found in storage. The 3 tiger cubs lay in a padded enclosure in the center of the room, their fur finally dry, their breathing steadier. Beside them, Sonny rested with her chin on her paws, keeping one eye half open, her body curved protectively around the cubs like a golden crescent moon. Caleb stood by the window, clipboard in hand, noting their weight and reflex responses from earlier that morning. At his side, Dr. Elaine Ferris, the center's lead wildlife vet, adjusted her glasses and squinted at the smallest cub flicker. Elaine was in her late 50s, with short curly gray hair and a collection of scarves she wore year-round, even in July. She was short and slightly stooped from a lifetime of bending over animal crates, but her voice carried the calm of someone who had pulled hawks from barbed wire and reset fox legs in snowstorms. Widowed 10 years earlier, she'd thrown herself into her work with fierce devotion, and the animals trusted her with a kind of reverence. "Sonny's doing better than any foster surrogate I've ever seen," Elaine said, crouching to change Flicker's bandage. "She's letting us supplement feedings and doesn't interfere during medical checks. But this licking behavior, that's more than instinct. That's intentional nurturing." Caleb glanced at the scene in the corner. Sonny was cleaning Ember's ears gently, then nudging Blaze to curl tighter when his back leg twitched. The tiger cubs, now 2 days removed from the edge of death, had begun to chirp soft, high-pitched vocalizations that usually only came from feeling safe. Sonny's tail gave a small wag every time one of them responded to her touch. "Do we document this?" Caleb asked. Elaine nodded, already scribbling notes. Absolutely. This might redefine how we approach maternal rejection cases, not just in big cats, but cross-species care. She's not just keeping them warm, she's modeling behavior. Outside the window, mist still clung to the tops of the Douglas firs, the storm's aftermath hanging in the air like a memory not quite willing to pass. A soft knock tapped on the glass. Macy. She stood in a yellow raincoat 3 sizes too big, her small hand clutching a spiral notebook. Her braid was uneven again, and her cheeks were pink from the cold. Caleb motioned her in. She entered without a word and went directly to the low bench at the side of the nursery. She opened her notebook and took out a set of colored pencils, then began to draw. Macy didn't talk much, not even to Caleb, but each day since the cubs arrived, she had shown up at the nursery window. Now she was staying longer. Today, she began to sketch Blaze, his stripes, still fuzzy oversized paws, splayed like a clumsy puppy as he nuzzled into Sunny's side. Elaine noticed and gave Caleb a sidelong glance. She's watching the way Sunny interacts with them. She documents everything. Behavior feeding even sounds, Caleb said quietly. She says it's so the cubs don't forget how they started. Elaine smiled, then returned her attention to Flicker, who was trying unsuccessfully to swat at Sunny's wagging tail. The tail flicked again, this time slower, almost as if Sunny were encouraging the movement. Caleb sat on a stool near Macy. "Did you want to hold one of the bottles during feeding, later?" Macy didn't look up. "Maybe, if Sunny says it's okay." He nodded. Sunny would know. By afternoon, the cubs were alert and moving more than they had in days. Blaze was the boldest, climbing awkwardly onto Sunny's back before sliding down again. Ember tended to stay close to the edge of the heat mat, watching everything with wide, thoughtful eyes. Flicker, though smallest, had started trying to groom himself, failing mostly, and ending up licking the blanket instead. It was Flicker that Sunny leaned toward, gently repositioning him with her nose, then curling her body around his side to keep him still. She began to lick him slow and rhythmic until the cub calmed and started imitating the motion on his own fur. Macy drew silently, then paused. They're learning from her. Caleb looked at her surprised. "What do you mean she's not just keeping them alive?" "She's teaching them how to be." Outside, the wind had died. The rain had stopped. A shaft of pale light broke through the clouds and streamed through the window, catching on the edges of Sunny's fur like spun gold. Later that evening, when the last bottle had been emptied and the cubs had curled up against Sunny in a perfect, striped pile, Macy placed her notebook on the counter and left it open. On the page was a drawing. Sunny in the middle, 3 tiger cubs sleeping beside her, and a small girl with a stuffed bear watching from the corner. The first sign came not from a monitor or medical alert, but from a soft, low whine that slipped through the quiet like a ribbon of concern. It was near midnight, and the quarantine nursery at Pine Grove Wildlife Haven was wrapped in the kind of stillness that only came after a day of storm and healing. Outside, the forest was calm for the first time in days, a gentle breeze rustling pine needles and distant crickets humming a sleepy tune. But inside, something was not right. Sunny had stood suddenly from her usual place between the cubs, her tail held rigid head low, her golden ears angled sharply toward Flicker. The smallest cub had been more lethargic than usual that evening, reluctant to feed, and now lay slightly apart from his siblings, his tiny body trembling beneath the blanket. Sunny approached him, sniffed his forehead once, then whined again, shorter this time, more urgent. Macy stirred from the cot in the far corner of the room. It was her first night sleeping over at the center, and Caleb had only agreed after she insisted bringing her own pillow and 3 sets of pajamas just in case. She sat up now, blinking, her hair tangled and her eyes wide. "Sunny," she whispered. The dog looked over, then back at Flicker. Her body lowered until she was lying beside him, wrapping herself around his shivering form. With slow, deliberate motions, she began to lick his forehead again and again, like a metronome of motherly insistence. Macy slipped out from under her blanket and padded across the floor barefoot, careful not to wake Blaze and Ember, who were still sleeping soundly. She knelt beside Sunny, placing her hand gently on Flicker's tiny flank. The heat was unmistakable. "Dad," she said louder now. "Dad, I think something's wrong." Footsteps rushed in. Caleb entered in sweatpants and a thermal shirt, eyes already scanning the room. Elaine Ferris, who had fallen asleep in her office nearby, followed moments later, tucking her scarf around her neck. The thermometer confirmed what Sunny had already known. Flicker's temperature was dangerously high, spiking nearly 104 degrees. Elaine moved with clinical precision, pulling on gloves, preparing a fast-acting injectable antibiotic, and setting up a cooling pad beneath Flicker's side. But Sunny didn't move. She stayed wrapped around him, allowing the equipment to work through the layer of her warmth, her body pressed close, as if by sheer will she could lower the fever herself. "Leave her," Blaine said quietly when Caleb moved to shift Sunny aside. "She's regulating his temperature better than anything we could do. I've never seen a dog respond like that before, a sensor," Caleb murmured. "She's not just responding," Elaine replied. "She's anticipating." Macy sat beside Sunny through it all, not speaking, just watching her fingers resting lightly against the dog's back. The room smelled of rubbing alcohol and milk formula. The only sounds were the soft beeps of monitors, and Sunny's breath slow and deep as she kept vigil. In the corner of the room, tucked beside the staff fridge, a motion sensor camera blinked quietly. Earlier that day, Caleb had installed it for behavioral research. Now, it captured the most tender footage the Haven would ever archive, a golden retriever gently licking the brow of a tiger cub, fighting for life, while a child sat beside them with wide eyes full of wonder and fear and hope. The fever broke just before dawn. It didn't happen all at once, more like a melting. The rapid breathing slowed, the trembling ceased. Flicker's body relaxed, and he let out a faint chirp, so soft Macy nearly missed it. Sunny gave one last lick to his cheek, then settled her head on the blanket beside him. Her body sagged in relief, tail giving a slow, tired wag. "He's stabilizing," Elaine said, wiping her brow. "You just witnessed something miraculous." Caleb didn't speak. He simply sat beside Macy and watched. Outside, the light was just beginning to rise. A band of orange cut across the trees like fire in the sky, and the scent of wet pine floated in through the vented windows. Blaze and Ember began to stir, yawning in their big cat way, stretching against each other without fully waking. But Macy didn't move. She stayed beside Sunny, one hand resting on Flicker's now cool fur, the other gently stroking Sunny's back. Later that morning, while Elaine checked blood work and Caleb caught a quick nap, a new volunteer arrived for her first shift. Her name was Tessa Langley, a second-year vet student with freckles across her nose and dark red hair tied in a messy ponytail. Tessa was bright and eager, but a little clumsy, the type who knocked over coffee cups while trying to take notes. "Hi," she whispered to Macy when she saw her sitting alone with Sunny and the cubs. "I'm new here." Macy looked up, nodded once, then pointed to a small notebook by the edge of the bench. "That's where we log behaviors. You can add things if you see something different." Tessa blinked. "Oh, you're the girl everyone talks about, the one who made the cub charts." Macy shrugged her cheeks a little red. She didn't say much, but she reached over and flipped open the notebook to show where she'd drawn symbols to represent feeding patterns, sleeping positions, and reactions to Sunny's movements. Tessa grinned. "This is amazing. Mind if I watch with you a bit?" Macy glanced at Sunny, who gave a quiet huff and wagged her tail. Then Macy nodded. "Okay, but don't talk too loud. Flicker just got better." The two girls sat together as the morning moved forward, the nursery filling with soft light. Elaine would later write in her case notes that the recovery was due to early intervention and antibiotics. But Macy, when asked to recount what happened, would always begin the story with 6 words. Sonny knew something wasn't right. By the time the first frost touched the edges of Pine Grove's late autumn, the tiger cubs, Blaze Ember and Flicker, had grown into bold, lanky juveniles, with their stripes deepening and their curiosity blooming. Their padded paws had learned to stalk in silence, their muscles stronger beneath sleek orange fur, but their hearts still beat in rhythm with the presence of Sonny. At nearly 8 months, they were ready for the next stage interaction with their own kind. Caleb knew the transition would be delicate. While the cubs had learned behaviors from Sonny that bordered on miraculous, mutual grooming coordinated play, even basic emotional signaling, they hadn't yet encountered another tiger. The center's team held several long discussions before deciding on a gradual approach. A new semi-open enclosure would be constructed adjacent to the adult tiger training habitat. There, the cubs could watch through reinforced mesh, observe body language, scent-marking, dominance rituals, all while still seeing and hearing Sonny nearby. The build took 2 weeks and was managed by a logistics coordinator named Donnie Welch, a former zoo engineer in his late 50s with wide shoulders, a crooked nose from a long-forgotten hockey injury, and a soft spot for unconventional animal bonds. He was gruff in tone but meticulous in his measurements, treating the safety of Sonny and the cubs as a personal mission. "This mesh is military grade," he said to Caleb, thumping the reinforced barrier. "But the magic's gonna come from her. That dog knows things we don't." Sonny watched the work with mild interest. She'd taken to sitting on a raised platform that allowed her to see both the nursery and the construction site. When Donnie first approached to pat her head, she sniffed him once and gave a brief tail wag approval granted. The day of the move, the air was crisp and full of the scent of pine mulch and clean hay. Blaze was the first to step into the new enclosure. He paused at the threshold, eyes wide, muscles tense. On the other side of the mesh, a full-grown Bengal male named Orion sat watching. Orion was the center's ambassador. Tiger, rescued from a traveling circus in Nevada. He was calm, but commanding his massive frame, covered in old scars that didn't dull the authority in his amber eyes. Blaze took a cautious step forward, then another, until he stood nose to mesh with Orion. The big cat didn't growl. He simply huffed once and turned, walking away with the kind of disdain only mature predators could master. Blaze, startled by the dismissal, let out a low rumble and backed away. Sonny, who had been sitting just outside the mesh on the opposite side, stood slowly and took 3 steps forward. She sat again, this time directly in Blaze's line of sight. Her tail began to wag, not frantic, not playful, but steady. Assurance. Blaze looked at her, then at Orion's retreating figure. He didn't cry or hide. He simply lay down facing Sonny. By week's end, all 3 cubs had made similar introductions. Ember, always the observer, had watched Orion and another female named Maya through the mesh for hours before making her approach. Flicker, still smaller, took his cues entirely from Sonny, only coming forward when she was in view, always mirroring her posture. Meanwhile, Macy had been busy in a world outside the forest. Her teacher, Mrs. Pennington, an eccentric literature teacher with a silver braid and a penchant for long cardigans and story circles, had heard from Caleb about Sonny and the tigers. She invited Macy to share the experience as a part of the school's community impact project. Macy had hesitated. The idea of standing in front of a room being looked at filled her with a familiar chill. But then she thought of Sonny and of the night she had curled herself around Flicker, knowing what no machine could. She agreed, quietly, then began to prepare. Her project, titled The Golden Mother, included drawings, behavior charts, and a 3-minute video of Sonny licking Blaze's muzzle through the mesh after his first meeting with Orion. She even included quotes from her own notebook. Sunny teaches them even when she's not touching them. She speaks in movements. She doesn't chase, she waits. The day of her presentation, Macy wore her red hoodie, this time without the stuffed bear. She stood in the school auditorium under soft lights, gripping her cue cards tightly. But when she began to speak, something happened. The story, Sunny's story, unfolded like it had a life of its own. Her classmates were silent. Her teachers leaned forward. And when she showed the final slide, Sunny resting outside the enclosure as 3 tiger cubs mimicked her sitting pose, someone in the audience sniffled audibly. By the time she finished, the room erupted in applause. Macy, surprised, smiled. Not a half smile, a real one. Later that day, local media picked up the story. The article was titled, "From Loss to Legacy: How One Girl and One Dog Are Changing the Wild." Back at the center, Caleb showed Sunny the paper. She sniffed it, looked unimpressed, and trotted off to check on Ember, who was pawing at a hanging toy, as if to show off for Maya. And behind the barrier, Orion watched them all with something that might have been curiosity, or perhaps something more complex. Recognition. 1 year later, Pine Grove was in bloom again. Spring had returned with its cool mornings and golden light, and the wildlife haven had expanded literally. The juvenile tiger habitat now spanned several acres of wooded terrain, complete with artificial streams, climbing platforms, and shaded groves. Blaze, Ember, and Flicker were no longer cubs. They had grown into sleek, magnificent young tigers. Their muscles defined, their instincts sharpened, their movements graceful and deliberate. And yet they remained unmistakably bonded to one golden figure who paced the perimeter like a sentinel. Sunny, now 8 years old, still bore the same radiant fur, though a few pale strands had begun to appear near her eyes. She moved a little slower, more deliberate in her steps, but the fire in her gaze hadn't dimmed. She visited the tiger enclosure daily, often accompanied by Caleb or Macy, though she didn't need supervision. The tigers responded to her presence like they did to no one else, ears forward, tails, relaxed body posture, open and reverent. Blaze would press his forehead to the fence when she arrived. Ember always gave a low, rolling chuff of greeting. Flicker, still smaller, but quick as lightning, would circle and flop down nearby as if to say, "I'm watching Mom." It had become part of the rhythm of the reserve. Caleb now worked full-time as the center's director, having handed off daily care to a team he trusted, including Elaine and the newly certified Dr. Tessa Langley. Tessa, once a clumsy student with nervous hands, had found her stride and was known for her quiet competence and patient focus. Her red hair was always tied back, and she wore scuffed boots that bore the marks of earned experience. Macy had grown too. She had turned 11 that March, and though she still wore her red hoodie on cool days, her confidence had blossomed. She now helped give weekend tours and wrote observation journals for the research team. But more than anything, she wrote stories, one in particular, "The Heart of a Golden." It had started as a personal diary and turned into something bigger, a children's book about a dog who raised 3 tiger cubs and taught them what it meant to be brave, kind, and strong. The illustrations were hers, hand-drawn with tender strokes, and the dedication on the first page read, "To the mother who didn't look like one, but loved like no other." The book caught fire in ways none of them expected. First in Pine Grove, then in the county, then nationally. Children across the country, many grieving, many healing, wrote letters to Macy. Some drew pictures of their pets hugging tigers. Others simply said, "Your story made me feel safe." But on the day that would test them all, there were no letters, only rain. It had started early, soft, and almost gentle. By noon, the weather report turned grim. A spring storm had stalled over the Cascades and poured unrelenting water into the creeks surrounding the haven. Caleb called an emergency lockdown. Staff rushed to secure gates, move animals, and activate the flood plan. The tigers were moved to their nighttime shelters, elevated and reinforced. All but one. Ember. During the head count, she was missing. Tessa found her on the outer edge of the enclosure, pinned between a fallen tree and rising water. A broken branch had snagged around her front leg, keeping her from escaping. The water was rising fast. "We can't reach her from here," Tessa shouted to Caleb across the radio. "She's going to drown unless someone gets in." And that's when Sonny broke into a run. No command, no signal, just instinct. She darted down the embankment, ignoring the slippery mud, the barking warnings behind her, and leapt into the water. Caleb screamed her name. Macy, standing behind the viewing fence, dropped her umbrella. The current was vicious. Swollen from the storm, it whipped around the tree roots and yanked at Sonny's body. But she swam like she had done once before when she'd been pulled from a flood herself years ago. And this time, she was the rescuer. She reached Ember, who was now snarling, not out of fear, but frustration. The branch held her tightly. Sonny barked and swam around, nudging her snout beneath the water, trying to loosen the trap. Then another sound. A roar. Blaze. He had torn through the secondary gate, followed by Flicker, and both tigers plunged into the water, their enormous bodies crashing like boulders through the stream. Staff screamed. Elaine shouted orders. But the scene unfolded in perfect, terrifying coordination. Blaze got behind Sonny and Ember, anchoring himself against the current. Flicker swam forward, biting the branch and snapping it in two. Ember pushed herself upward. Sonny nudged from below. Together, they lifted her free. Then, without hesitation, all four turned and swam back. Ember, now supported on both sides by her brothers and mother, not by blood, but by bond. When they reached the embankment, Sonny collapsed first, panting, soaked, shivering. Caleb wrapped her in a fleece blanket and carried her to the shelter without a word. Macy ran beside them, tears streaming down her cheeks, hand on Sonny's wet shoulder the whole way. That night, the storm passed. By morning, the haven was muddy but intact. No animals lost, no lives taken. Ember had a minor leg sprain. Sonny had a low-grade fever and slept all day under 3 blankets with a heating pad and a chew toy Macy had brought from home. But she wagged her tail when she saw Macy's face. 2 weeks later, Macy stood on a stage at the National Wildlife Conference in Denver. She had been invited to speak. Her book had inspired a new program pairing therapy animals with juvenile wildlife in sanctuaries. In front of hundreds of biologists and wildlife experts, she said, "She didn't just save them. They saved her. And when it was time, they returned the gift, because love doesn't forget. Not ever. Sometimes the greatest miracles come not from thunder or lightning, but from a quiet heart wrapped in golden fur." Sonny didn't share blood with those tiger cubs. She didn't roar or claw or mark territory. But she loved them with a heart so full it crossed every line nature ever drew. And through that love she changed their future and the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. Maybe that's how God works too, not always with parted seas or burning bushes, but through small acts of courage, through compassion in unlikely places, through the soft nudge of a dog who sees something before anyone else does. In a world that feels noisy, divided, or lost, stories like Sonny's remind us love still speaks. Miracles still happen. And sometimes they come on 4 legs and wag their tail. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to believe in goodness again. Leave a comment to tell us what part moved you most, or simply type Amen if you believe that love like Sonny's is a gift from God. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories of faith, hope, and healing. And may God bless you and everyone you love.